Okay. Well, one of the other library computers was giving me grief, so we're trying through a different computer, so I hope this works. We're doing something a little special, so if it doesn't work, it's not going to interrupt our normal flow, and oh well. So we are right now in the midst of Pesach, Modim L'Simcha. It's Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of Passover, and that means we're not in our usual parasha cycle, and we're going to wait until we resume with Acharei Mot in a week and a half, which means I've got a little bit more freedom. I don't have to slavishly follow the parasha for our lunch and learn. So we're going to do something a little different. We're going to look at something that is connected to Pesach. It is the Haftarah for the 8th day of Passover. We don't do a lot of Haftarah study here because we're always plugging away at the parshiot. But the Haftarah for the 8th day of Passover happens to be a fairly famous section of Isaiah. And I'm sure as we're going through it, you're going to go, oh, that's where that's from. And well, we're going to have some good discussions about why this is the Haftarah for Passover, and also what does it actually mean in and of itself. So page 1316. Almost all the way at the back. 1316. So this begins 16. 1316.
Oh, I'm 16.
So this is begins from Isaiah chapter 10, verse 32, and then it moves into chapters 11 and 12. Sound good? Good. All right. So little background: the prophet Isaiah lived around the time period that the northern kingdom of Israel was wiped out by the Assyrian forces, and was there when the southern kingdom was besieged by those same forces, and then they were forced to withdraw. So he lived in a very tumultuous time. Isaiah is considered one of the most preeminent prophets, partly because he was there during the reign of Hezekiah, one of the actually good kings we had, mostly, but also because we have so many of his words left as a record. And that makes him a very powerful and influential voice within the entire Bible. And you'll see some very, very famous things come out of his writings, most notably from this particular section. But he spoke not just to his own generation, but because he had seen the destruction of the north, and because he could see, being a prophet, the eventual destruction of the south, he is also speaking for the long term, not just to his generation, but to the generations that would come after these catastrophes, which includes us. Make sense? Okay. So we are on page 1316, chapter 10, verse 32 of Isaiah, and I need a volunteer. Since poor Harriet and David are up in Boston, freezing, while we're down here boiling.
Oh.
You're going to volunteer, thank you. Your best Isaiah impersonation.
This same day at Nob he shall stand and wave his hand. O Mount of fair Zion, O hill of Jerusalem, lo, the sovereign Lord of hosts will hew off the tree crowns with an axe. The tall ones shall be felled, the lofty ones cut down. The thickets of the forest shall be hacked away with iron, and the Lebanon trees shall fall in their majesty.
All right. Everybody loves metaphor. So one of the reasons that make that Haftarot are tricky, and the words of the prophets in general are tricky, is that many of them are poetic and full of metaphor and allegory, except when they're not. And trying to differentiate between what's allegory and what isn't is a little tricky. But here we've got a pretty heavy allegory going, or a pretty heavy metaphor going on here. So the basic idea is of chopping down, right? Well, chopping down is generally a destructive act. And in particular, when you start hearing words like the trees of Lebanon, which were renowned for their strength and majesty, it is the idea of chopping down something that looked strong and impenetrable. And what's being threatened here is the eventual uprooting, if I can play with the metaphor, of the kingdom of Judea, of the kingdom of the Jews. That Isaiah is saying, look, it's going to be a chop chop, and the kingdom is coming down. So keep in mind that image of a clear-cut forest of what was once mighty and proud and strong, having been toppled and torn down. Got that image in your mind? Good, because then the next chapter, first verse, is going to make more sense.
But a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse. A twig shall sprout from his stalk.
All right, pause there, because that's really, really, really important line. So first of all, let's take care of the metaphor. All right, remember, like I just said, we've got our clear-cut forest. Those are stumps. All right, they've all been chopped down, just everything's gone. What's happening in the first verse?
The shoot is growing out of one of the stumps.
A little shoot is coming. I know I'm not an artist. A little shoot is coming up out of the stump. Who here has ever seen that happen? Right? It's amazing. Think of the symbolism of that. The stump, I mean, the tree has been completely obliterated.
Yeah, but not the roots.
But you think it's dead.
And you think it's dead, but not the roots. I mean, I got to show our kids this just recently, last year or so. Our neighbors cut down a tree, but they only cut it down so there was about 6 foot of good-sized trunk still standing. Whole rest of the tree gone, right? And they're like, oh, they killed the tree. They got rid of the tree, you know. And a year later, there are already shoots coming up out of that seemingly dead wooden stump. And that's the metaphor that's being used here. This whole kingdom has been leveled, but a shoot will come out of the stump, and out of the stump of Jesse, or Yishai.
Why Jesse?
Why Jesse? Who's Jesse? Who's Yishai? Who's Ben
Marion's
Yishai?
grandson.
What's that? What's that?
Marion's grandson.
Ah,
That's why
okay.
I'm curious.
Well, it's less whose son he is, more than whose son is his.
Okay.
Jesse is the name of David's father.
Oh.
Right? So when we say a shoot from Jesse, we are talking about somebody from David's line. Right? So this is a poetic way of referring to the line of King David. So the majesty of this kingdom will have been obliterated, but there will come a shoot from the house of David, which is basically a foretelling of Mashiach. The Messiah will come. Right? No matter how barren it looks, no matter how dead the stumps look, there will eventually be an offshoot, both biologically and metaphorically, from this stump that will come from Jesse, come from David, that will grow again. That's the metaphor we're dealing with here. Right? So when you hear a shoot from Jesse, this is where it's referring to. When you talk about Ben Yishai, the son of Jesse, as in Lachadodi, that's part of the song in Lachadodi, it's talking about the ultimate coming of Mashiach, of the Messiah. Exactly right. Right? Exactly. And in our liturgy in multiple places, we talk about, David, son of Jesse, your servant, your anointed one. And so Ben Yishai, son of Jesse, is a metaphor stand-in almost always for either David himself or for the Messiah that would come from David's line. Good. So the twig will come back. Onward.
The Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for the Lord. He shall sense the truth by his reverence for the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes behold, or decide by what his ears perceive.
All right, so what do we know about this guy, about this offshoot, this sprout? What are going to be his qualities, his character? Put it into English for me, because the English isn't English. That's the trouble with poetry.
He's going to be wise, insightful.
All right, so let's make it a little bit more. He's going to have the Spirit of God, right? Because it says quite clearly that there's the Spirit of God upon him, and that he will be wise, he will be insightful, he will be valorous, he will have good counsel. What about at the what is it, verse 3, there, where he'll sense the truth by his reverence for God, his awe for God, not by what his eyes see, not by what his ears hear. So there will be a sense of intuitive understanding that will go past the external perception. Right? That's always the trouble when you're just a regular run-of-the-mill judge, is you've only got what your eyes see and what your ears hear. And this is saying, yeah, but the Mashiach will be able to understand at a different level than just the surface level that the rest of us are stuck with. Make sense? Maybe? All right. Why is this, or I guess I'll rephrase that. Doesn't need to be a question. This is in direct contrast to all of the other kings that Isaiah knew. Hezekiah was a little bit mixed, but pretty much all the other kings that Isaiah or any of the prophets had to deal with were not this. Right? What is basically being said here is, wouldn't it be nice if out of this stump of a forest that has been ruined because of the people, wouldn't it be nice if we got a king that grew out of all of this, that cared about God and actually understood things and wasn't just superficial and vain and petty and stupid? That would be a real anointed one, a real Mashiach. That's what we need. And this is the beginning of the idea that the Mashiach is going to be more than just a king. He's going to be the right kind of king, the right kind of leader. And as you can see, it begins with his connection to God and his ability to make good judgments and to understand things beyond the superficial level. Make sense? Pretty good description for a leader. Yes. Onward. Verse 4.
Thus he shall judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land. He shall strike down a land with the rod of his mouth, and slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. Justice shall be the girdle of his loins, the faithfulness the girdle of his waist. All
right. So because he has these abilities, because he has this understanding, this capacity to see the world as it is and to understand God as God is, and then to use the two together, justice is going to go forth. And justice, remember, means doing what is right for everyone. And this understanding will allow him to achieve that. And how is he doing his victories? It's very important in verse 4. How's he winning? How's he striking down? How's he slaying?
With words.
By words, right? What does that mean? How do you strike someone down with the rod of your mouth or slay them with your words?
What you're saying.
And how you say it.
What you're saying and how you say it. But
by pointing out their injustices.
By pointing out their injustices, exactly.
Lack of truthfulness.
So his great strength is not going to be his military prowess. It's not going to be that he will overcome the wicked by force of arms. We get other images of that in other parts, but what Isaiah is really focusing on here is the fact that the Mashiach will be somebody who speaks truth in a way that can level the wicked, that can destroy them, can remove them as a threat, can remove their ability, their power, by making judgments against them. You're wrong. You're corrupt. You have cheated this person. You must pay fines. You must be punished. The judgments of judges is meant to remove the wicked from their positions of power. That's something that we want generally in Judaism. It's not something that always happens. However, judges oftentimes are not able to make judgments that change the fabric around them. But they're supposed to. By the good words of a good judge, you are supposed to have a good society. And that's what the Messiah is coming here to represent. Makes sense-ish? Maybe? We're going to come back to that in some of our commentary. I just want to make sure we got the foundation. And now some rather famous sentences.
The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together, with a little boy to herd them.
Keep going.
The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion, like the ox, shall eat straw. A babe shall play over a viper's hole, and an infant pass his hand over an adder's den.
All right. So vipers and adders, of course, are types of snakes. The rest of it, what do you think?
Everybody should live in harmony.
That everybody should live in harmony? Don't you mean all the animals?
Well, that's what they're talking about, the animals.
Okay, so who is the lion? Who is the leopard, the wolf? And who are the lambs, the kids, the calf?
Well, I think they represent somebody, but
Well, who would you think? Based on what we've read already, or just generally that you know of society?
I think of what we know of society.
So give me an example of a wolf.
Mean person.
All right, a mean person. But let's make their meanness be more than just a petty emotion, right? Somebody that is vicious to another person, that is corrupt, that is that cheats the other person, that abuses another person.
Politician.
Certain people who abuse their positions of power, not
Criminals.
criminals of many types, right? People who prey upon other people. Right? What Isaiah is saying is that they are the wolves, they are the leopards, they are the adders and the vipers. And what's the big fear in society? How do you protect yourself from them? Right? How do we defend ourselves from them? Because it doesn't always seem like justice comes the way it needs to come to defend us from them. Maybe after the fact, but not before the fact. Right? So you walk down the street scared that someone is going to jump out from behind a bush and kill you. You're looking over your shoulder. You're not a baby who's playing at a snake's hole without fear. You know, can you imagine if you saw your kid playing where you knew there was a snake? Exactly. It's just it creeps us out.
The baby knows no fear.
The baby knows no fear, and there should be no fear, is what Isaiah is saying.
You're not born with fear.
Exactly. And people are not born evil either.
That's right. It's acquired.
Exactly. And so the vision that Isaiah is putting here of the future is one where we don't have to be afraid. Even the most vulnerable of us, children who don't even know what to be afraid of, don't need to be afraid, because the dangers of society will have been removed. People will have been turned peaceful. Notice the line about the lion and the ox eating straw. Right? It means the lion's not going to be eating the ox. They'll both eat the straw. And so the ox doesn't have to be worried. Right? The entire way that so many people live off of the pain of others will be gone. That's the vision. It's a nice vision. You can see why the lion and the lamb and the leopard and the lamb, and it's been depicted in many different ways. You can see why this has been such a powerful metaphor that has captivated so many people. Onward? All right. Isaiah is going to explain it for us as well.
In all of my sacred mount, nothing evil or vile shall be done, for the land shall be filled with devotion to the Lord as water covers the sea.
Right? Right? So the idea, this is sort of a summary of everything he just said. Right? Why will there be nothing bad? Because everybody's going to be connected to and devoted to God, and through that connection, they will know what is right, and by knowing what is right, they will avoid doing what is wrong. And then why do I need to be afraid? Right? The ultimate challenge for getting rid of our fear, and the ultimate challenge for helping others to avoid doing evil, is to have 100% absolute certainty that every other person is going to be doing the right thing.
We seem so far removed from that.
We do sometimes, don't we?
Yes.
Right? But sometimes we don't. Let me ask you this: you're out at the shopping mall, and you want to go try something on in the changing room. So you turn to the person who's there next to you and say, "Would you mind holding my bag, my purse, my wallet while I go into the changing room?" No?
Unless it's a friend. Or
Okay, but with a friend.
If it's a stranger that you don't, no way.
With a friend, maybe I would, but with a stranger,
Yeah.
no. Right? Would you? Well, I'm probably asking the wrong audience here, but I know from statistics that what the answer is here. Would you imagine handing over your cell phone to a stranger or even a friend without having the password on, and just letting them look through your phone have your contacts, look through your text messages.
I would assume that a friend would not. But I certainly
Why would
would
they
care.
Why would they care? Like I said, we're at the wrong generation in this room today. I remember reading once that 50% of married couples under a certain age, if they realized they had left their phone at home without a password or anything on it, would go home and get it, even if it meant being late for work.
Because they feel that need for the phone.
Because they think there might be something on it that their spouse or significant other shouldn't see that would make them upset. And then they'd be in trouble. So we don't necessarily even trust our most intimate partners in many circumstances.
That's sad.
It is sad because the lack of trust prompts many people to be excessively defensive in order to protect themselves. And it prompts many others to preemptively be bad because they know they can't trust the other guy, so they might as well get there first. Right? It's the old idea. If you see somebody's wallet on the ground, you go, well, you know what? Someone else is going to pick it up, so why shouldn't I? Right? So you preempt someone else's wickedness by doing what's wrong first, because if it's already going to be done, you might as well benefit from it rather than someone else.
But every once in a while, you read about the wallet left in the taxi cab and the driver turns it in.
Exactly. The $3,000 that was the day's receipts from some small mom and pop store that got turned back in by some good Samaritan. Exactly. Because that's what it should be. When we understand right and wrong, not just in the cost-benefit analysis in my struggle with other humans, but when we understand right and wrong because of my connection to God, which allows me to transcend that surface level, it's a lot easier to be good. And it's a lot easier if I know everyone else is doing it to trust that they'll also be good. And that's the idea here, is that the transformation of the world is not going to come because the Messiah is going to impose God's law on everyone from outside. You cannot have enough policemen to make the entire world be perfectly moral and law-abiding. It's simply physically impossible because you would have to employ half the population to police the other half of the population, and then you'd need more to police the policemen, and then to police the police, and it's just simply impossible. You have to have a truly good society come from the internal, come from the words, which goes back to our statement about Isaiah saying that the Messiah will slay the wicked with words. It's by teaching, by understanding, by making it so they understand what God is and what society can be when we have that connection. That's how Mashiach will transform the world. That's how you get the lion eating straw.
What happens when you have the people that are seemingly good people who believe that only their way is the only way and that the rest are not good because they don't follow the same rules?
So we're not there yet.
No.
Even among those who try to be the most righteous or try to be the most moral, and even among those who are doing a good job of it rather than simply doing a good act of it, there are many, many tendencies within us to not understand each other and to not understand the way that others can also be good and connected to God while being different. Because we still don't have that perfect understanding. Because we're not Mashiach. And we're not living in the days of Mashiach when all of us can understand that simultaneously. And so, yes, we are still in the in-between point. It doesn't mean we don't try. It doesn't mean we can't improve. But it does mean we shouldn't be surprised that we're not perfect yet. Onward.
In that day, the stock of Jesse that has remained standing shall become the standard to the peoples.
By the way, the word stock there really is shorish. It's a root, which is a much clearer metaphor continuing throughout the Haftarah rather than going to stock. I'm not entirely sure why they use stock. Maybe it has some Old English meaning of root or something, but what are you going to do?
Nation shall seek his counsel, and his abode shall be honored.
Right? So it's not just us that are going to be taking advantage of the Messiah's wisdom. Other nations will also come to the Mashiach and say, this is somebody who understands. We can learn how to do things by listening to his counsel. Keep going.
In that day, my Lord will apply his hand again to redeeming the other part of his people from Assyria, also from Egypt, Pathros, Nubia, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and the coastlands. Basically,
distant lands, but the idea, remember, was that the northern kingdom during Isaiah's time had been destroyed and the people carried off into anonymous captivity, unlike the southern kingdom, which would go as a group into captivity in Babylon. And that northern group is going to be gathered back in, is what Isaiah is saying. It's even those who we thought were most lost will find their way back in during the days of Mashiach.
He will hold up a signal to the nations and assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Then Ephraim's envy shall cease and Judah's harassment shall end.
All right, pause real quick. So Ephraim is the metaphorical stand-in for the whole northern kingdom, because Ephraim was the largest tribal part of the northern kingdom. And of course, Judah was the largest tribal part of the southern kingdom. So by saying that Ephraim and Judah are going to stop their fighting, we are saying the unity of the Jewish people will be restored. That Jew versus Jew argument, fighting, envy, enmity, that will come to an end in the days of the Messiah. We will be made whole once again. Onward, as he continues this idea.
Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. They shall pounce on the back of Philistia to the west, and together plunder the peoples of the east. Edom and Moab shall be subject to them, and the children of Ammon shall obey them.
So these are all nations that had surrounded the northern and southern kingdoms that would constantly play us off one against the other, putting us into wars with each other, and we were constantly vulnerable because of our disunity to their attacks. And so instead, once we're unified, we will be able to stop their attacks against us permanently. We will be able to keep them from attacking us.
Why is that section in a different indenture?
Because the translator felt that that was more poetic. And he always indents the poetic sides as opposed to the narrative side. Now, whether or not the paragraph or the lines right above it were really paragraph rather than poetry, we can argue about. But that's how the translator made his decision, was that he thought this was real poetry, and the next couple sentences are prose. And then we go back to real poetry, and that's why it looks that way. And that goes throughout the Eitz Chaim translations, or really the whole JPS, the Jewish Publication Society translation of the Tanakh. Throughout the prophets, you'll see sections in paragraphs and sections in poetic lines. And that was the translator's decision. But yeah, obviously in the Hebrew, it's just text. No formatting.
Okay.
Well, no formatting here.
The Lord will dry up the tongue of the Egyptian sea. He will raise his hand over the Euphrates with the might of his wind and break it into 7 bodies so that it can be trodden dry shod.
Sound familiar? Walking across the water in dry land, as in Exodus. Keep going.
Thus there shall be a highway for the other part of his people out of Assyria, such as there was for Israel when it left the land of Egypt.
Right. We need to see why this Haftarah is connected to Passover. Right. So this is the superficial reason for connecting it, is because it talks directly about the Exodus from Egypt. But the idea here is also that people who have fled or been carried off into Egypt or other parts of North Africa will be able to return to Israel easily. That the ingathering of the exiles will be facilitated during the days of Mashiach. The overarching reason, of course, for all of this being connected to Passover is the proto-redemption. Right? Passover, the Exodus from Egypt, this is the redemption version, the beta version of redemption. It's the sample version. It is the Reader's Digest version of redemption. You see that? That's what's going to happen times 1,000 when the Messiah comes. And so that's why Jewish prayer and Jewish thought constantly refers back to the Exodus from Egypt as an understanding of what the future holds for global redemption. You see the end of the suffering, you see the way those that you thought were mighty and undefeatable were overcome in order that justice could prevail. take that, multiply it by 1,000. That's what Messiah is bringing. That's the idea. Make sense? Good? Onward.
In that day you shall say, I give thanks to you, O Lord. Although you were wroth with me, your wrath is turned back, and you comfort me. Behold the God who gives me triumph. I am confident, unafraid, for the Lord is my strength and might, and he has been my deliverance.
Which happens to also parallel a phrase that's taken from Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, when we cross through that sentence. And the next phrase might even seem very similar if you were reading it in the Hebrew.
Joyfully shall you draw water from the fountains of triumph.
Ushaftem ma'im b'sason mimayeha Yeshua. That's the line. Right? If you know the mime song or you know the mime dance, this is where it comes from. And when we sing about water, we are not just singing about, the wet stuff that we use for our fields or for other things. Although certainly in many of the kibbutzim where the song was sung, that was part of it. The idea here is that water is representative of the upswelling of redemption, of the goodness of the world.
And you shall say on that day, praise the Lord, proclaim his name, make his deeds known among the peoples, declare his name is exalted, him the Lord, for he has done gloriously. Let this be made known to all the world. O shout for joy, you who dwell in Zion. For great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel.
All right. What do you think? Good stuff?
Yep.
You need to see why Isaiah is considered one of the great literary geniuses of, really all of humanity, and is often read in world literature classes that have nothing to do with Judaism, but just because of the beauty of phrase. This theme of Mashiach, I want to explore a little bit more. We'll see how much we can get into this. It may be a little esoteric. I don't know, but we don't understand and we don't talk about Mashiach enough, in my opinion, because we often leave it to others to discuss messianic aspirations. We often consider it to be almost taboo because some have abused the concept of the Messiah, both recently as well as in antiquity. And also, we are focused generally in Judaism on the perfection of ourselves and through ourselves, our families, our communities, and the world through our direct actions. But having some understanding of the hope and the vision of Mashiach, I think is an important marker that even if we're still way down here, knowing where the tree is headed does give us support, and it does give us direction for our own actions. So we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the messianism. See, even in English, the word just has been tainted, which is a shame, because it's our word, right? Mashiach, the anointed. All right. You still up for reading? Sure.
Yaakov continues with binding. This king, Mashiach, when he arrives, will tie together two vines. That is the kingdom of Yehuda and the kingdom of Ephraim, who had been bitter competitors until then, as predicted in clear language by Ezekiel, so that they will become a single stick.
All right. So we are back in this commentary at the end of the book of Genesis. And at the end of the book of Genesis, Yaakov, Jacob, is giving a blessing prediction to each of his sons. I don't know if you remember the scene where each son comes and he says some special words about them, and then at the very end of all of that, he passes away. And when he's talking to Judah, among them is he's using this very strange word about being this binding of the foal and the she-ass child. It's a very odd sort of phrase, and Radak is trying to help make sense. And he says, why would he use the term binding? And he says, well, that binding is meant to reference the reunification under the Messiah, who comes from the house of Judah, like David, that this Messiah will bind together the different parts of Israel, Ephraim the north and Judah the south. And he points to Ezekiel as using that metaphor even more explicitly. Onward a bit.
The reason Yaakov chose the expression binding for this kind of unification is that the most effective union, one that is least likely to come undone, is the one described in Hebrew by the word bind and in time.
Right, Kesher for the other.
Foal and mule's child refer to the King Mashiach, whom it has been said in Zechariah that he will appear riding on an ass, on a donkey foaled by his shears.
Right, so why does it say binding with this foal and this donkey child? Well, because in Zechariah, when it talks about Mashiach, it talks about riding on a donkey. So that image works, even though we're talking about Jacob talking to Judah thousands of years prior. How we doing? Struggling a little? Okay, yeah, it's a little complicated. So what Radak is saying is that the words that Jacob was giving to his son Judah were meant as prophecy for the future redemption of the people that would come long after both Jacob and Judah had passed, and long after the division of the kingdom, and long after the destruction of the north, and long after the destruction and captivity of the south, and its rebuilding, and its then second destruction, and then the final restoration. This is the final view. Everybody, all the Jews will be reunified under the Messiah, and there are clues about that in what Jacob was saying to his son, from the mentioning of the donkey and the mentioning of the time. So Jacob knew what would eventually come thousands of years in the future. But that meant Jacob also knew all of the bad stuff that was coming in the meantime. Just try and hold on to that for a minute. We're going to come back to that notion of being able to see the redemption means you also have to see the collapse in the meantime.
Yaakov continues with washes his clothes in the wine.
That's the next part of Jacob's blessing to Judah.
Here the word clothes is used as in Psalms 45:9 in Kohelet as describing one's words of wisdom and one's good deeds. In other words, tangible phenomena that we are familiar with are used as substituting for metaphysical, abstract concepts by our sages and patriarchs.
All right. That's really, really fancy way of saying, just because it says wash his clothes in wine, doesn't mean he's going to wash clothes in wine. It means that he is going to be washed in wisdom, that he is going to be washed in understanding, that he will know more, which again should go back to what we have been reading about in Isaiah. And
substitute wine for wisdom
and the clothes for good deeds, as he's saying, which you can find other examples of in Psalms and in Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes. So the fact that he says wash his clothes in wine doesn't mean there's any laundry being done.
So why don't they just say it?
Okay. Were you one of those people in poetry class when you were in high school or university who said, why did Shakespeare have to say, shall I compare you to a summer? Well, just say you like the girl, okay?
Sound like an account.
Right.
I say that was I were in that class.
So why do we use poetry?
Because it's fun.
All right, so part of it is it's fun. Part of it is it's beautiful, and part of it is the fact that it does lend a beauty to something. Right? The fact that we like songs. I'm guessing no one here objects to the idea that we have music and we have lyrics in songs, that they don't just say exactly what they mean. They're not written like an encyclopedia entry. We recognize that there is an emotional content that is brought through poetry, through song, through lyrics, that would be missing if it were done in straight prose. If anybody here has ever felt inspired by a song and not felt inspired by an encyclopedia, then you should understand what I mean. It's that there is a certain way that words are put together and certain emotions that go along with the image of being washed in wine that brings an emotional layer.
But how does the uninitiated figure that out?
They don't. And that's the problem. Right? So the uninitiated, who are completely uninitiated, know that it sounds nice. And that's a good start, to know that it sounds nice. Sometimes my daughter and I will be listening to, Nathaniel's not quite old enough yet, but we'll be listening to some like Simon and Garfunkel or other things from the days of good folk rock and protest songs and all of that. And she won't understand really what's going on, but she'll know that it's a good song. And then as she's gotten older, she's begun to understand what the lyrics really mean and what's really being talked about. And, you know, I am a rock, I am an island. Wait, that's a really depressing song. It sounds happy, and why does it sound happy? And what's this person saying? And why is the artist disagrees with the lyrics that he wrote for the person in order to make a point? It becomes much deeper. But the surface level is it sounds nice. And the truth is, if you were to give the prosaic explanation, the philosophical, metaphysical, intangible, most people's eyes would roll into the back of their head.
As mine are right now.
And they would walk away. So we are blessed to have a text, our whole Bible, but many rabbinic texts as well, that uses poetry, metaphor, and allegory and parable precisely to reach people when they are uninitiated. And then through the continued learning, raise them up to the initiated where they can then understand it on another level, a deeper level. And if they were to start with the, in quote, deeper level, nobody would get past the door. If you raise the bar that you have to already know all the secrets before we can teach you the secrets, people don't sign up for those courses. They don't beat down your door to learn them, or maybe, you know, one or two. But this was written in a way that could inspire and move emotionally more people, and then hopefully continue to raise their understanding and awareness bit by bit.
That's the key, is the emotional component to poetry.
Right.
This kind of thing is that's what brings people in. And once they're connected a little bit, then you can say, but guess what? There's something beneath this. There's something supporting this. There's something hidden here.
If you've enjoyed dancing or singing, depending upon your dancing ability, when you sang, you know, and you know, learning the grapevine step and all of that, you know, and right, you've enjoyed that. That's because of the poetry and the music. And then from that enjoyment, and then all of the good emotion of being connected to the people who are singing with you and all of that, then ideally we are meant to add the understanding that when we're talking about mind, we're not just talking about wet stuff, that we're talking about redemption, that we're talking about this perfection of the world, we're talking about this vision of redemption that comes through this vision of Mashiach. That second layer needs to be there, but if you start with it, no one's going to want to dance to that. And that's the balance. But we also need the layer to bring back, so it's not just a dance. So that it's not just, because you can dance better when you know it deeper, right? When you're dancing for the wet stuff, or just because it's fun to dance and fun to sing this song because it's got a nice, you know, rhythm, that's fun and that's nice, and it's a good sense of community. But when you dance because you are celebrating this vision of redemption, your feet move so much better. And that is the ultimate goal of learning more about what this all means. Which is why we're doing this. And even though it's painful, why we're going to keep plugging on. Onward.
Yaakov refers to the wine.
The wine.
The wine, meaning a specific wine, is distinct from wine in general. The fragrance of good wine envelops the people who drink it. Compare Hosea 14:8.
That's just that you go look it on your own time. It's a footnote.
The wine Yaakov speaks of is well known for its fine bouquet. We believe that the thrust of these allegorical interpretations is that if ever Yehuda were in difficulties in matters physical, then spiritual mental faculties should compensate for what he could not accomplish in the natural way. All
right, pause there. That's like the key line. So what he's saying here is that the blessing that Jacob is giving to Judah, which talks about the scepter never departing from your hand and the greatness of your people and all of this, contains this other, call it subliminal layer, which says, but it is the fragrance of the wine. It is this riding on a mule. It is this wisdom that you contain in your clothes. That will be your ultimate strength, even when the material fails you. Right? That you will be awash in this spiritual wealth, even when the material is denied you. And that's the big part of the blessing here. And Radak is absolutely right that for most of Jewish history, we have lacked material strength. Right? We have not had the biggest armies. We have not had the biggest nations. We have not had the most powerful organizations. Most of our time for the last few thousand years has been spent avoiding one disaster only to end up with another one, and trying to make sure that none of them were so catastrophic as to completely debilitate us. And yet at the same time, we always seem to be thriving and succeeding in spiritual and ethereal ways. Our people continue to produce great works of scholarship and of wisdom and of insight that just far outstripped what their material circumstances were.
To take Edie's point, position, I wonder if Yehuda understood what Yaakov was saying.
Judah the man?
Or the other sons, for that matter.
Right.
Really delved into the blessing that they were getting.
You know, it's a good question. It's a good question whenever we talk to our kids of whether they really understand what we're trying to say.
The behavior doesn't seem to have
Sometimes it takes a while.
to demonstrate their understanding.
Well, and Judah is, as we've talked about in other classes, is a bit of a mixed character. Sometimes he's very superficial, and sometimes he is very deep. He comes for Judah and Tamar. He stands up for Benjamin in the story there. So he does have his good qualities that may see this through. But who knows? Onward, otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Okay, this is the definition of Mashiach in Isaiah 11:2.
The section we just read.
The Spirit of the Lord shall light upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, the spirit of counsel and valor, the spirit of devotion and reverence for the Lord. The prophet continues, he shall sense from the root to smell.
Right, the word sense there is actually connected to the same word to smell something. And remember, we were just talking about the fragrance, the bouquet of the wine as part of the blessing.
He shall sense the truth by his reverence for the Lord. He shall not judge what his eyes behold, nor decide by what his ears perceive. Thus shall he judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land. He shall strike down with the rod of his mouth and slay the wicked with the breath of his lips.
Go ahead and do the explanation.
All these hyperboles are just that, parable.
It's a parable, right? It sounds wild. He's striking them down with his lips and all of that. It's hyperbole. It's a parable. And here's what it means.
The point he is trying to make is that over and beyond any physical perfection we know of in this world, the perfection of virtues, albeit intangible, is superior to anything perfect but tangible on earth. Hence the superiority of Mashiach with his virtues and supernatural qualities.
The perfection of virtues, albeit intangible, is superior to anything perfect but tangible on earth. When it comes to perfecting a person, when it comes to perfecting the world, the ultimate goal of the perfection and the only achievable goal of perfection is that of virtue, is that of the quality of the character of the person. You can't perfect the inherently imperfect material. You can make it better, and we can make a more comfortable chair, a nicer chair, a better chair, but we'll never make a perfect chair. But for a virtue, for goodness, for justice, for righteousness, that is something that we can perfect. And any degree of perfection in that realm, well, it just completely trounces any degree of perfection in the material. If you want to spend your days figuring out how to make a better chair, go ahead. But the real thing you should be figuring out how to make a better of is a you. That's the perfection you should be striving for. And that all goes back to that whole notion that he's trying to say of that blessing to Jacob, so from Jacob to Judah, and from this notion of what will the Mashiach bring. The Mashiach is going to bring words. He's bringing the intangible. He's bringing justice. He's bringing insight. He's not bringing physical perfection. He's bringing spiritual perfection. That's what we should be looking for. And that's what all those metaphors mean. Again, lion, lamb, goat, all of that, parable, hyperbole. This is not a literal description. This is helping us understand better what the goal is. And the goal is this spiritual, personal perfection achieved by understanding and connection with God. That's the point. Make sense? Maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's take a little journey through what Moses would have thought of all of this.
Moses said to God that the man who would be appointed his successor should possess the mind of all 600,000 Jews, since each one of them must be ready to accept him as his personal leader. seeing that no two Jews are of the same mind.
I love that line. You want to be the leader of the Jews? Fine. You got to have a mind equal to all 600 and some thousand of them, because trust me, you're going to have to get each of them to accept you as their personal leader. You can't just bully them into position. You've got to be there, able to match, able to understand, able to teach, to reach and lead each person where they are, not just the flock, but you have to be able to reach and teach each individual as they are. And no two of them are the same.
That's what you just said before.
Yeah.
About the, people of different opinions.
And trying to reach each of them simultaneously, Moses says, all right, God, you're going to have someone take over for me after I'm dead? Here's what I think should be at the top of the job search, ad, jewishjobs.com. You should be able to reach and understand the minds of all 600,000 Jews individually. That's a pretty big order.
I would think that even for God, that would be.
Well, for God, it's easy, but for a mortal leader.
But to find a person who would qualify.
So think about Moses then wondering, who's going to take over for me? I think about everything Moses did during Passover, this whole retelling of the story. And now think 40 years later, he's about ready to die, going, when I'm gone, who's taking this over?
He made mistakes.
Exactly, he made mistakes, and yet we're told from Torah and from our tradition, knew God better, understood what God wanted and what the world should look like according to God's vision, better than everyone else. Which means anyone after him is going to be a reduction. And if it's been this bad with him where he is, what's going to happen with the reduction? Which is where we're going from here.
God said to Moses, since you have spoken to us, I will show you all the future leaders of the Jewish people. All the judges and prophets I shall appoint for them from this time until the time of the resurrection. Meaning the
eventual coming of redemption.
This is the meaning of God showed him the whole earth.
Right, when he was standing at the edge of the land, it says he showed him the whole Eretz, and rather than reading Eretz to mean just the land of Israel, they're reading it as being the whole. He didn't see the land, he saw the whole land, meaning all of the earth in all of its infinite time. Well, not quite infinite, but would have felt infinite if you were Moses.
He showed him Joshua, who stood beneath, and Othniel, who took over leadership of the Jewish people from Joshua, etc. God told Moses that all these people were of one mind and one spirit. Concerning
okay, so pause there. So imagine this. Moses is about to go, and he asks God, appoint someone who understands all these people individually. And God says, well, let me show you something. Here is a vision of every Jewish leader that will lead this nation until the end of time. All right, got them all in your head? Joshua, Othniel, all the other judges, all the other prophets, all the kings, all the way up until Mashiach. See them all? You got them all there in your mind, Moses? All right, well, let me tell you something about them. They all are of one mind and of one spirit. Well, that's good. But
concerning what Moses had demanded at the very beginning, however, namely a man whose mind would evoke 100% positive response from every Jew, such a man would not arise until the arrival of Mashiach, of whom Isaiah has written, but a shoot shall grow out of Yishai, a twig shall sprout from his stalk. The Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him with the spirit of wisdom and insight. This is also what is referred to in who can determine the weight of the Spirit.
All right, so all these guys, they're all of one mind and one spirit, but none of them will do what you ask. None of them will have this capacity to evoke 100% understanding among 100% of the people 100% of the time. So what you asked for isn't going to happen until the Messiah. Every leader between here and there is not doing that. What was it? P.T. Barnum's, you can fool some of the people some of the time. Or you can fool all the people some of the time, and you can fool some of the people all of the time, right? But you can't fool all the people all the time. And what he's saying is you can teach some of the people some of the time, but you can't teach all the people all the time, all the ways they need to learn. Nobody will do that. Not even Moses himself. Nobody will do it until the Messiah comes. Which leaves us with a really big question. Why wait till then?
We don't have a choice.
Well, we don't, but doesn't God? Right? I mean, okay, fine. I get that if God had simply said it can't be done, never, ever, 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 no one ever will do that, then we could all just go, oh, okay, well, we'll do the best we can. But if we know that one person will be able to do it, why not front load him?
Yeah, why not bring him sooner?
Yeah.
Because we're not ready.
We're not ready to have the most perfect teacher? I mean, that's like saying, look, we have a student over here who's struggling in algebra. Now, we have the most amazing algebra tutor ever. But we won't let you meet with the tutor until you've banged your head on the table for 6 years, been held back. What are you waiting for? If you've got a perfect tutor and you need to have a student in need,
But you got to do the work. you got to do the research.
you have to know how much you suck before you get.
No, you have to put out the effort.
I can put out an effort with a good tutor.
When your child, like mine did, comes to you and says, I didn't have to do this problem.
Yeah.
I always said, did you try?
Well, I don't consider myself to be a perfect tutor either. So Moses
So
is.
that's what God's saying. He said, did you try?
Did you try? For a few thousand years. That's a long time to be trying.
That's my interpretation.
All right, well, we're going to have a little bit more. This is, by the way, from Shnei Luchot Habrit, wonderful commentary that on the Torah. But let's go ahead and continue with where we go from the Midrash in this.
The Midrash describes Moses as saying to God that only he knows the minds of all creatures. Since God is aware that each Jew has a mind of his own, seeing that he, Moses, is about to depart from the scene, he asks God to appoint someone who is able to put up with all these opinions represented by the Jewish nation. It is puzzling why such a well-meant request should be answered by God in the manner described by the Midrash.
Right, why should God tell him? Not going to happen. And why show him all the leaders in the meantime then? You know, you're going to show me all the failures? Because if the goal is 100% of understanding and 100% reach to every person, then everybody between Moses and the Messiah are failures. None of them are 100%. Well, thanks. So the vision you gave me to reassure me about the future is all of them are going to be flawed. Okay, let's try an explanation for this.
Our sages in Baba Batra 75 comment on Numbers 27:20, you will invest him with some of your glory. When Moses is told to appoint Joshua, that Moses was to invest Joshua only with part of his glory, not all of it. The elders of that generation are recorded there as having compared Moses' face to that of the sun, whereas they compared Joshua's face to that of the moon.
Which is, by necessity, less. So if Moses was the sun, Joshua is the moon. It's a reflection and a degradation. It's not as good. It's a diminution.
The change in the quality of leadership of the Jewish people was felt by these elders to be a shame and an affront. Why did God withhold some of his goodness from the people at that time?
All right, so he's asking the question that we're asking. Well, why even make Joshua step down? At least you could have kept him the same as Moses. Onward.
We need to understand why God troubled himself to show Moses all the Jewish leaders of the future and why this was a benefit to him.
Because right now it doesn't seem like a benefit.
After all, did not all the generations experience a continual spiritual decline so that Moses became a witness to the decline of this nation, something that would have caused him pain rather than satisfaction? We can answer this by saying that this is no more than a natural development, seeing that the further one is removed from the source of one's inspiration, the less the influence of that source which one experiences. Eventually, that source might cease to have any influence altogether.
God forbid. All right, so let's go back to our forest metaphor. So, it is the way of all things, says Shnei Luchot Habrit. It is the way of all things that whatever starts will gradually get weaker and weaker over time. If you imagine dropping a rock into a lake, right? The first ripples are going to be very big, and then as it goes out and out and out and out and out, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And he's saying, look, it's the same way with our image. We had a big forest, but the forest is eventually going to collapse. It is eventually going to fall. For Moses, it's only downhill. That's just the way of the world. That's nature. That's nature. It's called entropy in scientific terms, right? Right. It's the laws of thermodynamics. You know, things will naturally degrade. The energy levels will be reduced and dispersed unless you are doing something to artificially keep them up. So Moses is going to see that, yes, there will be a decline in the quality and capability of leaders from his point all the way through. Now, that's still depressing, but we're going to get there, right? So Moses is seeing the forest degrade. He is seeing the forest collapse, as you would expect forests to do. But
God demonstrated to Moses that all these future leaders acknowledged him as the source of their inspiration. Moses was thereby bound to be reassured. God showing him all these leaders in action set Moses' mind at rest. It showed him that all the branches continue to be firmly attached to the source, i.e. the trunk.
all right, yeah, the forest is going to go through a lot of changes. There are going to be forest fires. There's going to be wood rot and beavers and whatever else. No beavers in the Israeli forest, but you get my point. But the little branches that come back, the tiny trees that are nothing like the oaks that were there before, they're still connected to the same roots. They're still growing from the same soil. They're still part of the tradition from Moses, of the Sinaitic tradition. They're still Jewish. The fact that they are thinner and weaker and not as good as Moses would have liked them to have been, that may not be what we would hope for, but that is kind of natural. But more importantly is that they are still connected. The roots are still there. When we think about Passover, we often think of the Exodus as being something that just happened. What this is reminding us is that the Exodus and the Sinaitic revelation that came after, and all of our history, is all one giant tree. And we may feel that we're on a thin little branch somewhere, but the roots go all the way back. And we may even think that much of it's been torn down, but the stump are still there. And from that is going to come our sprout, our twig, our Mashiach. And growing from that same root, it will all come together as it should, eventually. And in the meantime, we don't lament that our twig is small. We don't lament that our forest isn't as mighty as it was in the Moses. That's normal. But it's not normal that we're still here. That's the miracle. That's what reassured Moses. Because from his point of view, it should have all faded out long ago. And after him, it should have all gone downhill rapidly and just crash and burn, and that should have been the end of the Jewish people and Torah. But when God showed him that there would be a future, even a future that was weaker than Moses's present, there was a future. And that future might be hard, and there were going to be a lot of big problems and a lot of stumps left behind. But eventually the twig would grow. Eventually it would be there. And as for why God isn't doing that, it comes back to this notion that Michael is saying, is that there is much for us to do. There's much that's needed in the world before that twig can truly be allowed to grow. It's not that God is withholding it. It's we have not reached a point where we can give it room to grow and flower. That's why our sages often talk about the potential of the Messiah in every generation, the potential for a redemption to happen tomorrow. Because if the conditions are right, the stump is still producing. The forest is still waiting to reblossom. But we keep clear-cutting it again and again and again, both spiritually for ourselves and through the circumstances of the world.
What was it about Rabbi Spearson that made his followers think that he was the Mashiach?
That's a whole nother class.
Okay.
In 25 words or less.
In 25 words or less, because they had been hoping for a Messiah a really, really long time. He was the 7th generation of Lubavitch Rebbe, which seems like a perfect number. And he had helped their movement grow and flourish. And therefore, what else could he be? So it was a combination of expectations that had been running for a long time that predated him, together with the success that they were currently enjoying, to make them use that title. It is
it accelerate the growth.
Absolutely. And there have been many religious movements that have had similar growth arcs. We would not go around calling all of their leaders messiahs. We wouldn't call Mormon leaders messiahs. We didn't call the early Christian leaders messiahs. We wouldn't call Muhammad a messiah. There have been many people who have taken either part of a religion or a whole religion from whole cloth and made it blossom overnight. That's not the definition of Messiah. So that's the root, if you'll pardon the tree pun one more time, of why they wanted that, and why it continues to be a big issue within Chabad and Lubavitch of his status in their mind. But for us, who are not Chabad and Lubavitch, and who are still looking for the Messiah as he has been looked for by our ancestors and by our sages, as he was written about in Rambam, as was written about in the Talmud, as was written about through the medieval poets, as was written about by the poetry of Isaiah. We continue to await, and we continue to work in that spirit in the meantime to create the world that is fitting for this sprout to grow. And there's a lot of work to be done, even if it doesn't start blossoming in our immediate future, and a lot of good that can still be achieved in that spirit. So, Chag Sameach, Moadim Simcha. Have a good rest of your Pesach. Oops, I'm turning on the wrong monitor. I forgot that I was on this computer.
Say hi to your mom.